Good evening, everybody, and welcome all of you to this live program at Orthopedic Principles. Today, our guest of honor is Dr. Saurabh Agarwal from London, United Kingdom. Dr. Agarwal is an orthopedic surgeon based in London, United Kingdom, specializing in upper limb surgery and trauma. He moved to London in 2004. He completed his orthopedic training and the FRCS in 2012, following by the EBOT in 2013. He's triple fellowship trained and he runs his own FRCS course in the UK. He's currently working as consultant trauma orthopedic and upper limb surgeon at the Princess Royal University Hospital, London, United Kingdom. So today, it's my great honor to bring back Dr. Saurabh Agarwal for this wonderful live program. Over to you, Saurabh.
Many thanks, Professor Hitesh, for your kind introduction. Good afternoon, good evening, everybody, depending on where you are. So I'm Saurabh Agarwal. I'm a consultant trauma and upper limb surgeon at Princess Royal University Hospital in London. The topic of discussion today is extra-articular distal radius malunion and its correction. So this lecture is basically a collection of thoughts, a few sort of cases which I've done over the last few years, and then sort of trying to make sense out of this topic. Right, so first slide, learning objectives. So these are the few things which we'll try and cover in next 40-45 minutes. So different malunions, dorsal malunion or a Smith malunion, selection of patients, very important, pre-operative planning, approaches, a volar or a dorsal approach, technique of fixation, and then finally complications and summary in the end. So we'll start with a paper, Jesse Jupiter, Boston, Massachusetts, recent paper 2019. He's spoken about approaches for distal radius malunions, a dorsal or a volar approach. So very good paper to read. So first, let's see the radiographs on the right side of your screen. Let's see what's the normal sort of parameters in a distal radius. So radial styloid should be a centimeter distal to ulnar styloid. There should be a volar tilt of around 11 degrees. And there should be a radial inclination of around 22 degrees. And normally there's a neutral ulnar variance. Of course, some risk can have positive or negative, which is normal for them if you like. So the thing to take out from this paper was, what is an unacceptable healing? I.e., which cases, which patients you would like to offer a corrective osteotomy. So radial inclination, we said normal is 22. So if it's less than 10, volar tilt, normal is 10, but if it's more than 20. Dorsal tilt, more than 10, i.e. effectively more than 20 degrees for that patient. Radial height, if it's less than a centimeter, because that affects your pronosupination and it stretches out your TFCC, which we'll see in the coming slides. Ulnar variance, so if there's a positive variance of more than 2 millimeter. And then finally, intra-articular step or a gap of more than 2 millimeter. So these are the patients, these are the X-rays cases where you are thinking in terms of a surgical intervention. So then what happens when these parameters are altered? So with the dorsal tilt, if the dorsal tilt is increased, instead of forces going through the radiolunate fossa, they start going through the ulna. So more force equals arthrosis, pain and arthrosis. With decreased radial inclination, normal inclination 22, let's say it becomes 10 or 5, so it decreases. So it will alter the carpal tunnel position, which means you're altering the flexor tendons alignment. That means they're losing their advantage, which can result in weakness to the hand, weakness to the grip strength, and they'll fatigue easily. So that's the importance of radial inclination. Then drudge. If there is a dorsal or a volar malunion and there's a drudge incongruity, which means there'll be pain, load transfer will differ. Again, when the load transfer changes anywhere in the body, arthritis will happen, and of course, rotations will suffer. Similarly, every time there's a dorsal malunion, it compensates by a mid-carpal flexion, so scaphoid flexes. If that happens, obviously your sort of angle between your lunate and scaphoid will increase, what we call as a DISI, your dorsal intercalated segment instability, also known as carpal instability adaptive. Wrist is trying to adapt to a dorsal or a volar malunion. So this is the reason when the parameters are altered, wrist kinematics suffer, forces alter, pain, arthrosis can happen. And that's the reason you want to do your corrective osteotomy to restore them. Then let's see a few cases. So this patient of mine was seen, I think, in March 2019. 62, fell down, managed non-operatively. But as you can clearly see, it went into a significant dorsal malunion, then referred to me. Clinically, as you know, with dorsal malunion, they will it's the supination which is restricted, and it's the palmar flexion which is restricted. So she came in with those painful daily activities of daily living affected. So sort of we sat on it for a good sort of 8 to 9 months, but she was symptomatic, and then the idea was to offer her a surgery in terms of a corrective osteotomy. Now, if I bring you to her X-rays, you can clearly see there's a significant dorsal malunion. And then if you see the PA radiograph or a corresponding CT scan, radial inclination is okay, but look at the radial height. Styloid is almost at the level of ulnar styloid. So there's a significant radial shortening and there's a dorsal malunion. So in this case, these are the two parameters which we need to bring to normal. Inclination is fine. So for all the X-rays that we're going to discuss, treatment first, do you want to do non-operative or operative? For the purposes of discussion today, I put all the X-rays which need surgery. Now, once you decide surgery, there are three things to consider by and large. One is your approach. Do you want to do volar approach or dorsal approach? Second is your technique, how you do your osteotomy. What are the tips and tricks? And third is, do you want to use your graft, autograft or allograft, or can you get away without a graft? So we'll pay attention to these three things in all the next 3-4 cases. So in this lady, you can see on CT scans, significant malunion, capitate is falling off the distal radius. You know, load transmission is not going to be right. So we offered her a surgery. Now I decided to do a dorsal approach in this case, only because I felt by the time I bring radius out to length, restore the radial height, there'll be enough distraction at the osteotomy side that I'll need the iliac crest bone graft. So we did use a graft from the iliac crest. Approach was dorsal. Technique, again, I'll show you in the following cases as to what are the tips and tricks in doing an osteotomy. And then again, same, just one more sort of take home message. So same X-ray from the last case, you can see there's a significant dorsal malunion. Lunate always goes where radius is going. So lunate will point in the direction of radius. It's the mid-carpal joint. It's the scaphoid which flexes, which try and adapts to the new home, if you like. So you can clearly see this, the scapholunate angle here is around 90 degrees. So there's a mid-carpal joint compensation. There's a DISI deformity. Initially, it'll be flexible, and with time, it'll become fixed. So this is important to understand how wrist compensates. Was carpal instability adaptive, and what is DISI? Then another case, young man, 27, so heavy demands on the wrist. Again, malunited radius. Range of motion was good, but he had a reduced grip strength. So again, he was offered a surgery. But let's see what approach, technique, and did we use a graft. So if I take you through his radiographs, now PA radiograph, you can see radial height is okay, inclination is okay, but there is a dorsal malunion. So you can see here it's around 10 degrees. So effectively it's 20 degrees. You can see carpus, capitis is tending to fall off. Lunate is tending to extend, i.e. following the direction of malunion. So young man, fit and healthy, lots of demands on his wrist. So first thing, treatment, yes, he needs surgery. Approach, let's see what we did. So we saw a dorsal approach for a dorsal malunion in the first lady. In this case, I decided to do a volar approach, and I'll tell you why in a minute. So if I take you through the II images, so you can see plate is on the volar surface. So we did a volar approach. A bit about the technique. So idea is to put this K wire, this wire there, parallel to where the deformity is. And then once I'm happy with it, then I put the plate on, do few distal screws, and you can see plate is lifting off. And the only way this plate comes down is by correcting the deformity. And that's why this wire is in plane of deformity, is parallel to the deformity. So important here is, so if I do my distal screws first, as you know, we do it routinely for distal radius fractures. If there's a fracture with a dorsal tilt and a dorsal displacement, we can use plate as an indirect reduction tool. So you can apply the same principle here to correct your dorsal malunion. Now, the reason or the advantage of doing screws first is, so once I've done those screws, I take my plate out, then I do my osteotomy parallel to the wire, put the plate back on, put these distal screws, 3 or 4, and then the only way this plate will come down is by opening at the dorsum, by correcting my dorsal malunion. So you get a lot more control if you put your plate and pre-drilled your screw. In the other examples, I'll show you where I have not done this. I don't have so much control, but it allows me to do a triplane correction. So in this case, I was just doing a dorsal correction, so I could get away with putting plate and distal screws first. I can still get my radius out to length with screws first, followed by osteotomy. But if I have to correct the length, the dorsal malunion, and the radial inclination, then to pre-drill screws is possible, but needs a lot of imagination. So this is an important point to understand, which will become a bit more clearer when I show you further examples. So technique we have discussed, fixed angle. Now, other thing to remember is volar cortical contact. If you see here on II image, this volar cortex is still in contact. So I can get away without using a bone graft. Now, this is an important point. So when to use a bone graft versus not. If the correction is less and I'll have a volar cortical contact, you don't need a bone graft. On the other hand, if you need a big correction, if your radial length was very short and you need to jack it out a lot, there's a distraction at the osteotomy side, then you need a bone graft. And because there's a lot of grafts, so normally it's iliac crest bone graft. So that's an important thing. And then fixed angle plate. The reason I mentioned this is, so in this case, I don't have a structural graft. I've not put a corticocancellous graft. So my only stability to my osteotomy is my fixed angle plate. So these days, with the advent of nice, strong, low profile fixed angle plates, we can get away without using a structural graft. So that is important. And then a bit about osteotomy technique. It's not relevant to this case. So I've shown you how to correct all the 3 parameters of volar tilt, radial height, radial inclination. So let's start with volar tilt. So you can see, as I was just telling you, this wire, K wire, goes parallel to the line of deformity. In this case, it's around 50. And then on this slide, you can see radial inclination instead of, let's say, 22 degrees is around 10. So this patient, if you like, has lost 10 to 12 degrees. And then there's a radial shortening. So again, what they have done is, so So if you get your wire parallel now, so you've collected your volar tilt, and then with laminar spreader, you can get it out to 25 degrees of your radial inclination. And then you can use your plate, do the distal screws. With the plate, you can jack it out, restore your length, and then fill your proximal holes. So this is one way of addressing your deformity in all the three planes. Now, if you were to pre-drill your radial holes here, like in the last case, in the Smith fracture, you will have to, so getting it out to length is easy. Getting it out, correcting your volar tilt is easy. The problem is this radial inclination. 10 degrees has to become 25. So your plate has to be in this direction so that by the time it falls on the radius, you've increased your radial inclination. So using a plate with pre-drill holes to correct all three planes needs a bit of imagination. But obviously it gives you more control because you pre-drilled your holes. So the same guy, a young 27-year-old young man, at 3 months, you can see he's doing well. Osteotomy is all filling up. Bit of gap left at the dorsum because obviously we've not used any graft. So when you're not using a graft, it can take a bit longer to heal up. Bear that in mind and let the patient know. So then another thing, if you've gone from the volar surface, and if there's a volar cortical contact, is there any way you can put a graft in? It's not easy, but it is possible. So if I take you to the next paper from Garcia Elias, he's a very sort of eminent hand surgeon based in Barcelona, Spain. So he wrote this paper a few years back, that anterolateral approach and how you can take your graft. So these are the pictures from his paper. So that's the anterolateral approach. That's the volar carpal branch, which needs to be ligated. Then radial artery goes radial so that it allows you to go further deeper. Look for APL tendon, develop a plane between brachioradialis and APL. And this is what he's shown how you can take a graft, a wedge graft. So this has come from the lateral surface. So he says, take this graft out. And this is how you can wedge it in the dorsal surface. Obviously, this involves a big incision, extensive dissection. So not an easy technique unless you're a pure hand surgeon, but graft is possible from the anterior or anterolateral approach. So if someone is interested in pure hand surgery, they can read this paper. Then let's see another case. So far, we've seen 2 cases of dorsal malunion. One was done dorsally with graft. The second case was done from the volar approach and without graft. So now this is another gentleman of mine, 63, extra-articular malunited Smith fracture. We can see that carpus is tending to fall volarwards. Sorry, I don't have the post-operative pictures for this guy, but the reason I have put this here is, one, for dorsal malunion, you lose supination. So for Smith fracture malunion, you will lose pronation and of course extension. So he had very reduced pronation, daily activities were affected. Now, what approach should we use? Obviously deformities in the front. So for all the malunited Smith fractures, idea is to do a volar approach because volar approach more sort of known to us with lesser complications. So approach is easy for Smith. Technique we have discussed in the second case. So same technique, a wire parallel to the deformity, a wire here, which is proximal to the distal radioulnar joint, so that when we do osteotomy, it doesn't go into the sigmoid notch. And then we can use the same wire to lever it out and put a plate from the front. Graft, again, if in this case, if there's a dorsal cortical contact, no need for graft. If you think you have to really jack it out, then put iliac crest graft. So it's as sort of simple as that. So then moving on to the next case. Now this was this was referred last year. So 59, she had a simple mechanical fall. She was just lost to follow-up. So she came around 4 weeks time, and by that time fracture had this. So she was referred on. So her injury was on 19th of December, and you see on 17th of January. So just 4 weeks have gone by. For some reason, she was lost in the system. By the time the fracture was already maluniting, you can see there's a bit of radial shortening here. Radial inclination is reduced. There's a dorsal malunion. So there's a problem in all the three planes, in the coronal plane, in the sagittal plane. This ulnar styloid was old actually, so it was there even on the initial x-rays. Now we got a CT scan, and you can see in this sort of view, cortical pieces are all inside. You can see the articular surface is a mush, is in many pieces. So we know on 17 January, a month down the line, that she's not going to do well. So we decided to go in early, and she was referred to me at this stage. And then we got a scan in March, and you can already see in the coronal sections, that's the cortical piece. Look at all the articular steps. It's very wavy, it's irregular. And I have put 3 sagittal scans, and I'll explain to you why in a second. So these are all 3 radiolunate scans. So you can see capitate just appearing, and now it's fully there. So it's covering the whole radiolunate fossa. What it shows is there's a step here. As you go further, it becomes more wavy, more irregular, and look at what's happening here. So why radiolunate fossa and not radioscaphoid? So again, load transmission is through the radiolunate fossa. So if that becomes arthritic and clinically painful, we are duty bound to do something. Whereas in a radioscaphoid fossa, because the force transmission is not that much, you can get away with arthritis. Patients are not symptomatic. So radiolunate fossa is very important. So 2 things here. CT scan again shows extra-articular. You can see deformities in all the 3 planes. And we've introduced a new term now, an intra-articular malunion. You can see the articular step is all wavy, irregular. So both are major. Extra-articular major problem, intra-articular major problem. Now, important was, where is her maximum pain? Is it because of extra-articular malunion? Or is it because of intra-articular malunion? So I gave her a steroid injection in the radiolunate joint, and at least 30-40% pain tended to go away. So I knew problem was coming from both, i.e. I'll have to address both. So again, same 3 things. So do we need to operate on her? Answer is yes. Approach, technique, and graft. So let's see what we did. So in terms of treatment, we've decided, yes, we need to operate on her. Well, what are the treatment options? Can we wait and watch on her, hoping in a year's time it'll get better? Corrective osteotomy of the distal radius, like in the last 2-3 cases. Radioscapholunate fusion, because she does have radiolunate arthritis and clinical pain. Or should we combine corrective osteotomy to distal radius and RSL, radioscapholunate fusion? Can we think in terms of wrist salvage procedure like a neurectomy and steroid injections? Or can we do a simple ulnar shortening osteotomy? So again, I decided to do the corrective osteotomy to radius and RSL fusion. And I saved some pictures. So let's see what we did. So these are the good pictures to see how the technique of how you do a corrective osteotomy. So as we've been saying, first thing is to put a wire. You can see the blunt end here. You don't want to put a sharp end because it can go into median nerve. So blunt wire in line of deformity. So it tells me the deformity is around 15 degrees of dorsal tilt. Then 1 or 2 wires, whatever you prefer, parallel to this wire. So that once I've done this, and these wires have to be proximal to DRUJ, because when you do your osteotomy, you don't want to go into the sigmoid notch of radius. So they have to be sort of just proximal to, and equally you can't be doing your osteotomy in diaphysis. So once I've got my parallel wires and they're just proximal to the sigmoid notch, I check it on II. And the reason I have put 2 wires is you can use 2 wires to lever your distal fragment. So once I'm happy in both planes, then you do your osteotomy parallel to these wires. And then this is another sort of a little sort of a tip, if you like. So you can see this laminar spreader I've opened to get radius out to length. You can see it's clearly out to length now. The second laminar spreader I've opened more to restore my radial inclination. So I've corrected two deformities. Then if I take you to this picture, the fourth one on the right side, you can see I've restored my volar tilt to 5 degrees. So in practical terms, either you get your volar tilt to 5 degrees or neutral, not 10 degrees. The reason being you want patient to have good extension. So you don't want to create too much flexion in your volar tilt. So once I'm happy, I put these two wires in a PA view and a lateral view, which will hold my osteotomy, which allows me to take off my laminar spreader, one or both, to pack it up with graft. And now, so I hope how to do an osteotomy, the technique is now sort of clear. So first tip, wire is parallel to the deformity. Second, osteotomy just proximal to the sigmoid notch. Third tip, use 1 or 2 laminar spreaders as is needed. Fourth tip, use 2 wires and then pack it up with graft. Now, does this need a graft? Answer is yes, because you can see how such a big gap. So there's no way there'll be any volar cortical contact. There'll be a distraction at both dorsal and volar surface. So I do need a cortico-cancellous structural type of a graft. So got it from Eiler-Crest graft, then packed it. So this fellow there, this is a radioscaphoid lunate fusion plate. You can see 2 screws in lunate, 2 in scaphoid. But because these plates are not sort of, we don't have long RSL plates. I don't think companies make them. So I had to I just improvised, put a hand plate there. So, and this view tells you none of the screws are prominent, and more important, graft is fully packed here. The volar surface is all covered with graft. This view tells you my metacarpal hand plate is there. None of the screws are prominent in the first extensor compartment, because if any screw is prominent, it will give tenosynovitis, and then you'll have to take those screws out and do a tenosynovectomy. And then this view tells you that none of the screws are going in the sigmoid notch, because as you know, sigmoid notch is concave like your tibial plafon and articulates with the ulnar head. So screw can easily go into this concave surface. So do lots of views. Make sure your screws are not in the first extensor compartment or in the sigmoid notch. So once I'm happy, then you can put your plate on. So let's see some operative pictures. So that's a dorsal approach, midline incision. First step, make good thick flaps, skin and fat. So with your knife, go right down to the retinaculum. Then with a wet gauze piece, you can elevate the 2 flaps. Importance being, or the advantage being, good chunk of fat means your good flaps means good blood supply to the skin, means good wound healing. Second, your skin nerve, your superficial radial nerve, will be then in the fat, so you protect it. So you can see these 3 blue dots pointing to the superficial radial nerve. Same story here, you will see your ulnar cutaneous nerve. So once you're happy, second step, you need to incise the retinaculum. Idea is to go between 3 and 4. So I've taken out my EPL. So that's thumb. EPL will go towards the thumb. So radialize your EPL. Third step then, subperiosteal elevation of your second compartment and your fourth compartment. So you can see your ECRL, ECRB surrounded by sheath, EDC, EI surrounded by a nice sheath. So post-operatively, there'll be no tendon adhesion and they'll glide nicely. Then we need to incise the capsule to see the carpal bones. So again, that's thumb. So radial base flap, that's your capsule. And you can see your carpal bones, capitate, hamate. That's your scaphoid, that's lunate. So once I've seen those, and we know, and I saw the radiolunate joint, there was indeed a grade 4 arthritis. There was no cartilage on the lunate. So idea is to now prepare these two surfaces, denude them of cartilage, which is what I've done here. You can see the ligament, scapholunate ligament is gone. That's lunate, that's scaphoid. Then, as I was showing you in the II images, a wire in the deformity, two wires parallel to this wire, osteotomy parallel to these wires. Use these wires to correct your, beg your pardon, correct your dorsal malunion. Once I've done all this, then iliac crest bone graft, and I put corticocancellous graft here. You can see the cortical chip because, again, cortical structural graft, good strength, and it will support your plate. And you can see now I put two wires, one in lunate, one in scaphoid, so that I can get the orientation right, use them as joysticks. So this is the stage here, basically. And then once you're happy, you put your plate on. So you can now see this is this blue color one is my radio scapho lunate fusion plate. Importance here is try and get 2 screws in lunate, 2 in scaphoid. That's my graft. So you can see I only got 2 screws here, not enough. So I put a metacarpal hand plate there. And then that's my capsule. This picture shows, operating picture shows capsule closure. Finally, I've closed the retinaculum. So your whole plate is covered. You can't see anything. Importance, a very important point, always leave EPL out. So for your any dorsal wrist work, even if you think that EPL can go into the retinaculum and you can close the retinaculum on top of it, still leave it outside. The reason being, EPL is a very sensitive tendon. If it gets compressed or squashed in the retinaculum, blood supply gets compromised and it can rupture or get tendinitis. So always, always, always leave it out. Even if you think retinaculum will accommodate it, it doesn't because plate is already there. So yeah, this happened. So this surgery was done, I think on 14th of November. So these are x-rays 10 days or 2 posts of 2 weeks. So yeah, not a lot to appreciate there other than the fact that we've got radius out to length, inclination is fine, your tilt is okay there, so corrections are all good. You can see a lot of graft at the radiolunate, radioscaphoid surface. I've got 2 nice screws in lunate, 2 in scaphoid. None of the screws are in the sigmoid notch. Ulnar styloid was old. She didn't have ulnar sided pain, so no need to excise it. Lateral view again tells you none of the screws are prominent. Tells you I've packed the graft in the osteotomy side. It's all nicely packed, and the tilt is restored. So we'll get some X-rays, sort of final X-rays at 4 months, and hopefully in the next talk I can put them here. So before I go to this slide, importance is now. So we've introduced another thing. A dorsal radius malunion, even a Smith fracture, whichever malunion, with radiocarpal arthritis. So now there are 2 potential problems and may need 2 sort of operations combined into one. Radiocarpal arthritis, radiolunate is more important. Radioscaphoid radiological arthritis does not equate to clinical severity. Radiolunate arthritis, again, patient may have arthritis on X-rays, clinically they may be fine. So you need to sort of, one way is to do a steroid injection or even clinical sort of palpation. And if they have pain, then just by doing distal radius corrective osteotomy, you're only taking away 60–70% of their pain. So you need to address both. Then 3D sort of printing and 3D jigs. I don't use them, but for completeness sake, I thought I'll put another paper if someone is keen on 3D printing. These days it's very easy. You can have 3D printers at home, print out those jigs and then get them to labs for sterilization. So they're not that expensive these days. Again, another paper from Jesse Jupiter in 2018, and they wanted to, so they've done a randomized controlled trial in multi-centers to see patient-reported outcome measures after use of a 3D printed jig versus a 2-dimensional sort of planning, which I've just shown you. And what their conclusion was, there was no significance between the two in patient-reported outcome measures, but because they felt the power was insufficient. So they said further studies are needed with larger sort of patients, larger group, larger magnitude. How you do 3D jigs and 3D planning. So you have to take that X-ray, do a virtual osteotomy in your computers. Once you've done a virtual osteotomy, correct it in the 3 planes as I showed you. Then put a virtual plate and screws. And once you're happy you've corrected in 3 planes, you know that's the jig you need. So you get that jig 3D printed. And once you've got that jig, you have to get it sterilized and use it on a patient. It's like doing navigated knees versus sort of the way traditionally knees are done. Again, sort of both can give equally sort of good results once you know how, once you do a pre-op planning for your patients. Then let's introduce another concept here now. So we've so far spoken about corrective osteotomy to the radius. So problem was in the radius, you address the radius. But are there cases where the problem was in the radius, but you can get away with the ulnar shortening osteotomy? So yes, there are few and far in between, but let's see which cases. So these are just the pictures I've taken out from a journal for completeness sake. So in this case, you can see there's a distal radius malunion. You can see radius is clearly shortened, but inclination is fine. And then your volar tilt is maintained. So if your inclination and volar tilt is maintained and radius has only shortened, these are the cases where you can do a ulnar shortening osteotomy. So once you shorten the ulnar and bring it out to the same length as radius, your sigmoid notch will be okay because your inclination and volar tilt is okay and patient will be fine. So in this case, they've shortened the ulnar and put a plate on, and you can now see they've restored the ulnar variance. They've decompressed the ulnocarpal compartment. So yes, you can do a simpler ulnar shortening procedure provided the prerequisites of radial inclination and volar tilt are met, which are very few and far in between, because as you know, radius tends to tilt to dorsal malunion, but this is important. Then another concept is, are there any cases where you have to shorten both the radius and ulnar? Again, I haven't personally done a case, so I couldn't put any x-rays, but yes, there are. If your radius is shortened more than 2 centimeters or around 2 centimeters, then there's a limit to how much you can jack out your radius. So after 1.5 centimeters, if you've still not got your neutral ulnar variance, then it's better to combine it with ulnar shortening. Then again, these are, we're not sort of discussing ulnar side. Topic today is not ulnar sided pain. Again, for completeness, I've included this slide. So this is again the slide from before, CT scan from before. So you can see radius is very shortened here. Radial styloid is almost at the same level of ulnar styloid, which means first ulnar will hit your carpus here, so patient can have ulnocarpal abutment. Second, cause of pain can be an ununited ulnar styloid. Third, TFCC, which comes from sigmoid notch into the ulnar styloid, and radius is so shortened, TFCC will stretch a lot. When it stretches, it can tear off. When it stretches, you will lose pronation, supination, so drudge pain. So those are all the things you need. ECU tendinitis. So those are all the things you need to think of when radius shortens or in a malunited distal radius, and you need to address them. So management of a malunited distal radius fracture with symptomatic ulnar styloid, plus minus ECU problems. So how to deal with that? So if ulnar styloid is big and patient has pain, you can put a compression screw through it. If ulnar styloid is small, you can excise it and reattach TFCC with an anchor. ECU tendinitis, steroid injections. If not, open the sheath, debride it, do tenosynovectomy, and deal with it. So it has to be dealt with. How will you know whether ECU is involved or not? Again, clinically, and you can get an MRI or an ultrasound guided steroid injection before you do your surgeries. Management of drug arthritis in a distal radius malunited fracture. Again, drug arthritis, difficult problem to deal with, especially in young people. Management can be, if it's just synovitis, fine, you can give steroid injections. Otherwise, ulnar hemi or total sort of ulnar arthroplasty, Scheckers, by young man, not easy to deal with because you can't offer a young person, man or woman, ulnar hemi. So drug OA, not easy, especially in young people. Then finally, malunited distal radius fracture with a symptomatic TFCC tear. So as I just showed you, shortened radius, malunited radius, TFCC will stretch. Now, in fact, some study says that in a distal radius fracture, intra and extraarticular, almost 30% tear rate for TFCC. But nature is kind, TFCC tends to heal up, and we never get to know. But if there are symptomatic TFCC tears, way to diagnose is clinically, of course. You can sort of, if you put your thumb in the fovea here with ulnar deviation, patient will have pinpoint pain, or a MR arthrogram. And then at the time of surgery, we can deal with it arthroscopically, put an arthroscope, debride it to stable, healthy margins. If TFCC was attached to a ununited ulnar styloid, and we need to excise the styloid, we may have to reattach TFCC with an anchor. So idea is arthroscopically or mini open, we deal with TFCC tears. So please remember, distal radius malunion can have problems on the ulnar side, and they need to be looked into and they need to be addressed. Last few slides, sorry. So yes, so we've been talking about dorsal malunion, and we've been kind of saying that volar, if possible, do a volar approach, try and avoid a dorsal approach. Why is that? So as we know from fixing our distal radius fractures, if we come from the volar side, hopefully, and I'll tell you why, hopefully it should avoid extensor tendon irritation and ruptures. Not always the case, but hopefully. Then because volar surface is concave, plate can sit nicely there and no need to take it out. And other important advantage is, we've been talking about this volar cortical contact. So from the volar side, it's easy to see that contact and we can avoid use of a graft. So it's the visual sort of confirmation, satisfaction, which is another advantage. Disadvantage, so even if you've done a volar approach and put a plate from the volar side, patient can have both flexor and extensor tendon issues. Flexor very evident, FPL can rub over the sort of the distal rim of the plate and can have tendinitis. Extensor tendon issues because when you're doing an osteotomy from the volar side, you have to complete the osteotomy, you have to go to the dorsal surface to correct the dorsal malunion. Then the sharp ridges at the dorsal surface can cause EPL rupture or irritation. Then when the osteotomy is healing up, dorsal callus can cause EPL rupture. So it's a very important point that even from the flexor side, you can have EPL rupture. Then of course, sort of if you're not putting a graft, there's a small chance of delayed union or a non-union. Then a dorsal plate. I think the advantage is sort of very evident. Problem is dorsal malunion. Go dorsally, correct. It's easy to correct the malunion. And you're putting the plate on the tension side, which is the side you should be putting it. Disadvantage, very clear, very evident, is the extensor tendons. Current evidence is 1 in 5 plate needs to come out. Obviously, these days we're using grade 4 or sort of in evolution, grade 4 titanium. So we have very low profile plates these days. criticism for a dorsal approach. And then sort of finally complications, EPL rupture. So we've spoken about, always leave the EPL out of retinaculum if you're doing a dorsal approach. If you're doing a volar approach, be aware that dorsal ridges and dorsal capsule, dorsal osteophytes can cause EPL rupture. So if you're worried, go and debride those. Loss of reduction, osteotomy can sort of, you can lose the reduction. Osteotomy can enter the sigmoid notch, as I've shown here. So be very aware. That means patient can get drug arthritis and pain in the future. Delayed and non-union, because there's a big gap at the osteotomy size, especially if you're not using graft. Implant failure, infections, flexor and extensor tendon issues, as we've discussed. Cutaneous nerve injury, so superficial radial nerve neuroma or a ulnar cutaneous nerve neuroma can be very disabling. So as I showed you in that operative slide, good, nice, thick skin flaps so that nerve goes with the fat. And then, of course, CRPS. Another small paper, again, Jesse Jupiter has done a lot of work in corrective osteotomies. So this was to talk about EPL ruptures through a volar approach. So same thing as we've discussed, in the absence of screw prominence. So technically you were fine, but still the dorsal callus or the prominent osteotomy resection edges or the osteophytes, which can in time cause attritional rupture to the EPL. So I think last slide to summarize. So these are the things we have discussed. When to do a dorsal versus a volar approach. So for a Smith fracture, always a volar approach, because we prefer volar to a dorsal approach. For a dorsal malunion, try and do a volar approach, but if you want to use a graft and you're not as competent, which I'm not, as Garcia, then you can do a dorsal approach. But remember, most of the malunions, dorsal ones, you can get away with the volar approach without a graft. Graft we've discussed, axial shortening, so pure ulnar shortening we've discussed. When to do distal radius corrective osteotomy and ulnar shortening osteotomy. So if the distal radius is shortened by more than 2 centimeters, you need to shorten both the bones. Importance of correcting radial inclination. So again, because it alters your carpal tunnel and your flexor tendons, and it can make hand weak. So look at radial inclination very carefully. Volar and dorsal approaches we have discussed. Always look for ulnar side symptoms. So address your TFCC, ulnar styloid, ECU if needed. And then last thing was your closing wedge osteotomy. So we've spoken about opening wedge. You can do a closing wedge, but the problem is radius will become short because you're closing the wedge. That means you will have to combine it with the ulnar shortening osteotomy. So I've just included it for completeness sake. We don't do closing wedge. And I think that kind of summarizes this talk. So I thank you for your kind attention and good luck for your exams.
Thank you, Saurabh. Yet another brilliant presentation from your side. And you have covered almost the entire gamut of operations for the distal radius malunion. Just a few questions. The one that you finished at last regarding closed wedge correction. Now, let me take you through a paper by Takuro Wada from Japan, who looked at closed wedge correction versus open wedge correction. And he combined it with an ulnar side osteotomy, and he almost got similar outcomes with that. So what do you think about it?
Outcomes will be similar because you're bringing ulnar. So once you've done an ulnar shortening osteotomy, ulnar will come and unite with the sigmoid notch. So results will be similar, but you are adding another extra operation. So moment you do ulnar shortening osteotomy, it will come with its own baggage. You're putting a plate there, ulnar is a subcutaneous bone. Fine, you can offset it by putting a plate on the volar surface, but that means another separate incision. Then you are risking delayed union, non-union, metalwork failures. So yes, you can do that, as I said. It kind of also almost guarantees that your radial osteotomy will heal up, but you are adding another operation.
Thank you, Saurabh, for that. And the other question is, what are your specific indications where you're going to put screws into the scaphoid and the lunate? So at what scenario? You've shown that in an illustrative case, but can you just summarize where do you get the screws into the scaphoid and lunate? In what particular scenario?
Very seldom cases, only when you have radiocarpal. So all those cases where you have comminuted intra-articular fracture, we know some patients will get arthritis. But we also know that radiocarpal arthritis is very sort of forgiving. Clinically, radiological severity doesn't equate to clinical severity. So in all those cases where you've got radiocarpal arthritis, but clinically, patient is symptomatic, they have radiocarpal pain, especially in the radiolunate joint. So those are the ones you need to fuse lunate and scaphoid to the radius. So those are the ones you need to combine RSL fusion with your corrective osteotomy.
And do you think by putting screws into the scaphoid and lunate that you're further worsening the wrist carpal biomechanics?
No, not really, because we do partial wrist fusions and total wrist fusions all the time. If there is arthritis, you can't allow a patient to live with pain. You have to offer something.
Thank you for that. The other questions is, what is the indication for the traditional operation, the Darax, the Sauer-Kaponggi operation, or the Bowers hemiresection arthroplasty?
Yeah, not good. Darax gives you impingement between the resected ulna and the radius. Sauer-Kaponggi is a proximal Darax, if you like. So the only just about role of these two procedures is in an elderly patient, sort of with very low demands, or a rheumatoid elderly patient. Otherwise, they're not good procedures. That's why drudge OA in a young person is very hard to manage. Because what can you offer to the young person? You do ulnoid hemi, then it erodes the sigmoid notch cartilage. Then what? Then so it's a very difficult problem, drudge OA in a young person.
So in an elderly patient, you can still think about these salvage operations like Darax, Bowers hemiresection, etc.
Only I don't remember last doing a Darax. Only in a rheumatoid person who's very elderly, you can just about get away with it. Otherwise, it's not a good operation to do.
Okay. And in case you're doing it, do you think about any tendon support or a tendon sling to support the proximal ulna?
In what cases?
In case you're doing a resection, hemi-resection of the ulna.
I don't think any supports will work. People have asked. People have talked about, you can put interpose PQ to stop impingement and all that. For a TFCC, if it's not reconstructible, then you have to use palmaris longus or an allograft to have drudge stability.
Okay. Thank you for that. Saurav, let me see if you have any questions from our YouTube channel as well. I think, yeah, a lot of Varun Tandra has said that your talk has been excellent. And thank you, sir. This is the comments that he has put it on YouTube. Let me see if there are any more comments. I think that's all the questions that we have, Saurabh. Thank you for yet another fantastic presentation. Really wonderful. And with those wonderful case examples, you've covered the entire spectrum of malunited distilleries practice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hitesh, and thank you guys for your kind attention.